This starts the second reading of The Midwife's Apprentice, chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 The Miller's Wife. Suddenly, it was summer, and leaves erupted on every tree and bush in the village, and you could see flowers blooming by the road, in the churchyard, and in the hair of the young girls as they swung down the path to the village square. And just as the world burst into flowers, the midwife's college burst forth into bread. Soft wheat bread for dinner, and crunchy brown oat bread for supper, and crusty rolls to dip into cool ale on a warm summer morning. Even Beetle shared in the sudden blooming of bread, and didn't care to ask why until, her stomach finally full, she found her mind empty and casting about for something to figure out. She hit upon the mystery of the sudden abundance of bread. Where from? And how? And why? And as she thought and watched and listened, Beetle noted that the midwife had taken two mysterious errands. Beetle, I must to the miller to have my oats ground to flour, crush the bitter milkwort, and boil the wormwood syrup while I'm gone. And off the midwife would go, without the oats. Or, Beetle, I am taking the comfrey tonic to Joan at the bridge. See you finish boiling the goose grease for ointments. And off the midwife would go, with no comfrey tonic. Or, Beetle, I am going to feed the hens. Strain the nettle tea and pour it into clean flask. And off the midwife would go, although Beetle knew the last hen had made soup weeks before, and the hen house lay empty, except for an occasional, hopeful, hungry dog. Curious about this unusual behavior, Beetle began to follow the midwife when she went on these errands, creeping behind the trees and under fences, careful to keep out of sight, and the cat stalked along behind her. So they looked like a Corpus Christi Day procession on its way to the churchyard, the midwife, the girl, and the cat. Each time, the midwife made for a field near the Old North Road, and each time, Beetle feared to creep closer lest she be caught, so she could not discover what was happening in the field and whether it had anything to do with the bread. One bright morning, 3 days before St. John's Eve, Beetle said, Mistress, Meg from the Manor Dairy has asked for some of your goose grease ointment, for her legs ache from child's carrying, and she says nothing soothes like your goose grease ointment. She will pay you 4 eggs and a tot of butter. The midwife, pleased both to be praised and to be paid, sent Beetle on her way, without telling her to return straight away, or setting chores for her to do after. Beetle raced to the dairy, thrust the greasy ointment at Meg, grabbed the eggs and the butter, tied them in her skirt, and ran by her secret hidden way to the field by the Old North Road. She put the butter and eggs carefully in a hollow log and climbed a tree from which she could see the whole of the field. In no time, there came Jane Sharp from the village, and from the other path, with a basket of bread steaming and warm, came the baker. Jane Sharp and the baker fell to such furious hugging and kissing, and him with a wife and 13 children in their cottage behind the ovens, that the startled Beetle fell right out of that tree. The baker caught her by her hair and the midwife began shouting about how apprentices with nothing to do but spy needed a beating and more work. Then Jane hissed, "And don't you be telling anyone, Beetle, or I'll turn you out in the cold again and break both your knees before I do." "And who would I be telling then?" Beetle responded. "I don't talk to no one but the cat, and he don't care who you're kissing." With that, which had taken all her courage, Beetle gathered up the butter and the eggs, only one of which had broken, and marched away. The cat, marching behind her, heard Beetle mumbling, "You do not want to hear for this is not mysterious at all, and was not an adventure, and there was no butterflies in it, or rats, or mice, or cream, or moths, which is all you really care about." Beetle muttered to the cat all the way back to the cottage, where she sat in the yard throwing green apples at the cow, and waited for the midwife to return and give her a beating and more work. When the sun was high in the sky, there came the miller running into the yard. "We need the midwife." "She is not here." "Where is she?" "I cannot say." And Beetle could not, for she had promised she would not. The miller grabbed Beetle's arm. "Then you, Dung Beetle, will have to do." And off he dragged her by the arm to his cottage. "I cannot," she said. "I am afraid. I do not know what to do. I cannot." But he continued, grabbing and dragging, and soon Beetle was inside the miller's cottage. At any other time, she would have enjoyed the visit, for never had she been in such a luxurious dwelling, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above, and a high, soft bed, all enclosed by curtains, such as the king or the pope must sleep in. But this was now, and not any other time, and on the high, soft bed lay a large, pale woman, waiting for the midwife and getting Beetle instead. The miller thrust Beetle toward the bed. "The midwife's apprentice is here to help you, my dear. Things will go easier now." And he was gone. The miller's wife lay uneasy in her great bed. She grabbed Beetle's arm and cried, "I no longer want this child. It was a mistake. Make it stop. I will do this no longer." "I cannot," said Beetle. "I am sore afraid." At that, the miller's wife's cries increased in frequency and volume. "Ah!" Beetle tried to think what the midwife had said at moments like this. "2 eggs and a laying hen, and 'push, you cow,' were the words that occurred to her. But when Beetle spoke them, they did not have the same effect as when the midwife did. "By the bones of St. Cuthbert, they have sent me a nitwit. You lack wit, no brain. You think to touch me?" Screeching still, the miller's wife let go of Beetle's arm and began to throw at the girl whatever she could reach from her bed: a jug of warm ale, a loaf of bread, a sausage, the brimming chamber pot. The terrified Beetle huddled in a corner as the woman rose from her bed to find more weaponry: side of bacon, bowl of stew, walking stick, soft felt hat, and someone's breeches. Half the village, it seemed, then pushed into the chamber to see the cause of the turmoil. The summer sun, the press of the curious crowd, and the exertions of the reluctant mother-to-be warmed the room to the point that Beetle felt she was in hell, being attacked by demons, and her screams joined the rest. Suddenly, the door flew open, and there stood the midwife, steam rising from her skin in the heat of the room. A pea and onion pudding landed at her feet. She was not smiling. "Out!" she shouted. "Out!" she screamed. "Out!" she bellowed, and the room fell empty. The midwife grabbed the miller's screeching wife and slapped her once, twice, 3 and 4 times. Beetle lost count. Finally, both the screaming and the slapping stopped. The midwife led the miller's wife back to the high, soft bed, and holding her bruised face in her hands, poured a mug of wormwood tea down her throat. When all was quiet, the miller's wife began her labors again, and finally, as Beetle told the cat later, there come a baby. It was then the midwife spied a beetle in her corner. Idiot, she shouted. Clodpole, she screamed. Nincompoop, she bellowed. And she dragged Beetle out of the room, across the yard, and back to her cottage, by the very arm the miller had used to drag her away. Beetle did not mind so very much. She was just grateful to be out of that room. For weeks later, the midwife calls her not Beetle, but brainless brat, and clodpole, and good for nothing. And Beetle worked twice as hard and talked only half as much. For she feared being turned cold and hungry out of the midwife's cottage. Chapter 5 The Merchant. Now it was high summer, and the hay drying in the fields, and all the village praying for the rain to hold off until the grain was safely cut and stored away for winter. The midwife, needing to replenish her stores of leather flasks, nutmeg, pepper, and the water in which a murderer had washed his hands, made plans to attend the St. Swithin's Day Fair at Gobnet under Green. Beetle had been to fairs, but only to beg a turnip or some pig bones for a stew, and never had her belly been full enough for her to lift her head and look around. She dearly longed to accompany the midwife, but still being brainless brat, she was afraid to ask. And so, the day before the midwife's departure, Jane set Beetle a score of tasks to accomplish in her absence, and made ready to leave without the girl. Beetle knew this was an important journey, for the midwife soaked herself in the mill pond, dried her hair in the sun, and sharpened the pleats in her best wimple. She sang to herself as she worked, a tuneless tune that Beetle supposed a witch's spell, until she recognized it as Summer is a Coming In, sung by someone who lacked the practice and the heart, the sweetness to sing. On her way back to the cottage, laden with newly washed clothes to spread in the sun, the midwife tripped over Walter the blacksmith's second best pig and fell, left leg twisted beneath her. Her furious oaths made Beetle truly fear she was a witch, for only someone who had truck with the devil would know such words. Although bellowing that Beetle was stupid as a woodchuck and clumsy as a donkey in a dress, the midwife allowed the girl to help her into the cottage and onto her straw bed. Broken by God's whiskers, broken, she moaned, feeling her ankle, and she set about telling Beetle how to pack the boneset herbs and wrap the rags about the limb. Beetle feared this meant that because the midwife could not walk, she could not work, and thus would need Beetle's help no longer. Actually, it meant that Beetle was to go to the St. Swithin's Day Fair in the midwife's place. The joy in Beetle's heart warmed her insides and lit her face, even though the midwife's ranting about lack of wit and the dire consequences if she were to lose the silver pennies or spend too much or come home with the wrong things. The blazing sun of St. Swithin's morning dried the hay, gladdened the villagers, and saw Beetle on her way to Gobnet under Green with 4 silver pennies, an onion, and a hunk of bread, and a cheerful heart. To get to Gobnet under Green, Beetle took the road north and followed the river, passed the mill, turned east at Stephen Fletcher's cottage, cut across the Abbey fields ablaze with the violet blue flowers of the flax, turned north again at Barry on the Birkenhead, and meandered easterly and northerly until it ended in the glory that was the St. Swithin's Day parade in the market square of Gobnet under Green. Beetle was too excited to eat along the way, so she gave her bread and onion to a hungry goat that then followed her near all the way to Goblet. When she arrived at the fair, she did not know whether her lightheadedness was from her hunger in the sun or the thrill of being in the midst of such gaiety and color, and she did not care. She passed through the forest of bright booths with flags and pennants flying, offering for sale every manner of wondrous thing: copper kettles, rubies and pearls, ivory tusks from mysterious animals, cinnamon and ginger from faraway lands, tin from Cornwall, and bright green woolen cloth from Lincoln. She laughed at the puppets, wondered at the soothsayers, applauded the singers, and cheered for the racing horses. Her nostrils quivered at the smells of roasting meats and fresh hot bread and pies stuffed with pork and raisins. But her gut still trembled with excitement as she was content just to smell. As forenoon gave way to midday, Beetle wandered the fairgrounds. As midday turned to late afternoon, she remembered why she was there. She sniffed all the spices for free before buying nutmeg and pepper. The hangman was doing a brisk trade in murderer's washed water, but Beetle was at last able to secure a bottle. At the end of the street of the cupmakers, Beetle was told just before the church of Saints Dingard and Vigor she could find the best prices of leather flasks. And so she did. The merchant's booth was filled with sundry over other wares for wondering at: shiny brass needles, ribbons of red and lavender, copper spoons and bronze knives, boots of fine red leather with embroidery on the toes, and combs of polished wood and ivory. Beetle had never used more than her fingers to comb the burrs and thistles from her hair, and probably could have lived her life so doing. But on one of the combs, between the 2 rows of teeth, was carved a sleeping cat. He looked so much like the cat Beetle knew that she ached to own it. For long minutes she held the comb, looked at it this way and that, smelled the fragrant wood, and admired the sleeping cat. Then, with a great sigh, she put it down and turned to bargain with the merchant for the flask. Although, or perhaps because, she was new at the bargaining game, Beetle handed it with such charming solemnity that the merchant took a fancy to the skinny young thing, and with a broad wink threw the comb in with the cat into the pack with the flask. "Comb those long curls till they shine, girl, and sure you'll have a lover before nightfall." Another wink, and the merchant turned to his next customer. The comb was hers. Beetle stood breathless for fear someone would snatch it back. Never had she owned anything except for her raggedy clothes and occasional turnips, and now the comb with the cat was hers. The wink and the comment about her curls, though Beetle didn't know it, were also gifts from the generous merchant, and they nestled into Beetle's heart and stayed there. Beetle settled the pack on her back and started for the village. In front of the church of Saints Thingard and Vigor, she stopped to pull the comb through her hair. Curls. Were these tangles, then curls? Beetle leaned over the horse throw and examined her hair in the still water. Definitely curls, surrounding a thin little face with big eyes and a pointed chin, big nose and big ears, and the curliest hair at the fair. This is me then, Beetle, she said, and looked again. Alice! Hey, Alice, I need you, said a man, pulling at Beetle's sleeve. She looked about for this Alice. Alice? Here? What do this say? He asked, thrusting a piece of leather with marks on it under Beetle's eyes. She blinked and looked at him. Who is Alice? Don't be funny, Alice. These hair marks are supposed to show my winnings on the horse race, and I need you to read them to be sure Cobb and Groom is not cheating me. What do it say? I'm not Alice. Course you are. The man leaned over and peered closely into Beetle's face. Wait, he shouted, spraying her with spit. You're not Alice. You look like Alice. Where is Alice? Alice! And off he went to find Alice, to make sure Cobb the groom was not cheating him on the horse race. Beetle stood perfectly still. What a day! She had been winked at, complimented, given a gift, and now mistaken for the mysterious Alice who could read. Did she then look like someone who could read? She leaned over and watched her face in the water again. This face, she said, could belong to someone who can read and has curls and could have a lover before nightfall. And this is me, Beetle. She stopped. Beetle was no name for a person, no name for someone who looked like she could read. Frowning, she thought a minute, and then her face shone as though a torch was fired inside her. Alice, she breathed. Alice sounded clean and friendly and smart. You could love someone named Alice. She looked back at the face in the water. This is me, Alice. It was right. So the newly named Alice shifted the pack on her shoulders, and with her head back and bare feet solid on the ground, she headed back to the midwife's cottage and never noticed when it grew cool and dark, for the heat and light within her.